The morning mist clung to the village like a ghost unwilling to leave, curling around the thatched roofs and dampening the edges of the wooden gallows that stood in the center of the square. The air was thick with the scent of wet earth and the faint, acrid tang of burning pitch from the torches that lined the gathering space. Villagers shuffled in, their faces a mix of curiosity and grim satisfaction, murmurs passing between them like a slow-spreading fire. At the heart of it all, bound and silent, stood Vrissa. Her silver skin caught the pale light, shimmering faintly even in the gloom, her elongated fingers twitching against the rough rope that dug into her wrists. The humans had tied her tightly, as if afraid she might dissolve into the air if given the chance. Her amber eyes, wide and unblinking, scanned the crowd, not in fear, but in quiet fascination. Even now, even here, she observed. The magistrate, a barrel-chested man named Orin, climbed the steps of the gallows, his boots thudding against the worn wood. His beard, streaked with gray, bristled as he glared at the alien. The crowd hushed, waiting. "By the laws of our ancestors," he boomed, "this creature has trespassed where no outsider may tread. She has walked among us, learned our tongues, listened to our stories. Stolen the secrets of our hearts." A ripple of anger passed through the villagers. A woman near the front spat on the ground. Vrissa did not flinch. She had known this was possible. When she had first come to this world, slipping past the guarded starports and into the wild edges of human civilization, she had understood the risks. The Galactic Accord forbade open interference, but it said nothing of quiet study. And so she had lived among them, not as a conqueror, not as a merchant, but as a scholar. She had slept in their barns, traded labor for bread, learned the lilt of their dialects. She had watched mothers sing their children to sleep, seen old men weep over graves, witnessed lovers steal kisses in the shadows of the grain fields. And for that they would hang her. The magistrate continued listing her crimes, his voice rising with each accusation. "She has recorded our ways, written of our grief, our joys, as if we are nothing but specimens to her kind." A man in the crowd shouted, "Monster!" Another threw a clod of dirt. It struck Vrissa's shoulder, leaving a dark smear against her silver skin. She did not react. The truth was, she had written of them, pages upon pages, in delicate script only her people could read. But not as specimens, as marvels. Humans were chaos and contradiction. They waged wars over strips of land, yet would risk their lives for a stranger's child. They feared the unknown, yet reached for it all the same. They loved so deeply it left scars. And now they would kill her for bearing witness to it. The noose was rough against her throat as the executioner fitted it. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, eager. Vrissa closed her eyes, not in fear, but in regret. There was so much more she wanted to understand. Then, a shift in the air, a flicker of movement at the edge of the square. The magistrate raised his hand. The executioner gripped the lever, and a knife cut through the rope. Vrissa fell, not onto the hard planks of the gallows, but into the arms of a woman who smelled of pine and iron, her grip firm, her breath hot against the alien's ear. "Run. The voice was low, rough with disuse, but there was no hesitation in it. Vrissa had no time to question. Hands still bound, she stumbled as the woman hauled her upright, shoving through the suddenly roaring crowd. A rock whizzed past her head. Someone grabbed at her arm, but the woman, her rescuer, snarled and lashed out, her elbow striking flesh. A cry of pain. Then they were free, sprinting toward the tree line. Behind them, shouts erupted. Torches swayed as men gave chase. The forest swallowed them whole. Branches whipped at Vrissa's face as they ran, her bare feet slipping on moss and damp leaves. The woman moved like a shadow, darting between trees with the ease of someone who knew these woods better than the streets of her own village. Vrissa followed, her pulse roaring in her ears, the noose still hanging loose around her neck like a grotesque necklace. They did not stop until the sounds of pursuit faded, until the only noise was their own ragged breathing and the distant call of a nightbird. The woman turned, her dark eyes scanning the trees behind them before she finally looked at Vrissa. Up close, she was younger than the alien had first thought, perhaps only a few years past 30, but her face was sharp with hardship, a jagged scar cutting from her brow to her cheekbone. Her hair, black as crow feathers, was tied back in a messy knot, strands escaping to cling to her sweat-damp skin. She was beautiful, not in the way of the soft-faced women in the village, but in the way of a storm, untamed, unpredictable. "Why?" Vrissa asked again, her voice hoarse from the noose. The woman wiped her mouth with the back of her hand, then reached for the knife at her belt. "Hold still." Before Vrissa could react, the blade flashed, severing the ropes at her wrists. The woman didn't answer the question. Instead, she nodded toward the deeper woods. "We keep moving. They'll track us at first light." Vrissa flexed her freed hands, the feeling rushing back into her fingers. "You did not have to do this." The woman snorted. "Yeah, I did." And with that, she turned and walked deeper into the forest, leaving Vrissa with no choice but to follow. The forest was alive with whispers, leaves rustling in the breeze, the distant call of an owl, the soft crunch of undergrowth beneath their feet. Jera moved like a shadow, her steps silent, her body weaving effortlessly between the trees. Vrissa followed, her bare feet stinging from the rough terrain, her silver skin glinting faintly in the moonlight that filtered through the canopy. She had so many questions. But the woman, Jera, she had called herself when Vrissa finally pressed, had spoken little since their escape. She was a creature of action, not words. Every few minutes, she would pause, tilting her head as if listening to something Vrissa couldn't hear, then gesture for them to change direction. "You're leading them away," Vrissa realized aloud as they skirted the edge of a shallow ravine. Jera shot her a sideways glance. "You're smarter than you look." It wasn't a compliment. Not quite. But it wasn't disdain either. Vrissa studied her rescuer as they walked. Jera moved with the kind of confidence that came from a lifetime in these woods, her body honed by survival. Her clothes were worn but sturdy, a hunter's garb patched in places, the leather of her boots soft from use. The scar that marked her face was old, but it stood out starkly against her sun-darkened skin, a story written in flesh. "Why did you save me?" Vrissa asked again. This time Jera stopped. She turned, her dark eyes boring into Vrissa's. "You were watching," she said at last. Vrissa blinked. "Not just the village," Jera continued, her voice low. "You were watching me." A flush of heat crept up Vrissa's neck. It was true. She had noticed Jera before today, had seen her slipping through the village like a ghost, always on the outskirts, never lingering. The others avoided her, spoke of her in hushed tones. Cursed, they called her. But Vrissa had seen the way Jera's hands were gentle when she helped an old man carry firewood, how she left fresh kills at the doors of struggling families in the dead of night. "You don't belong with them either," Vrissa said softly. Jera's jaw tightened. For a moment, Vrissa thought she might argue. Then she exhaled sharply and turned away. "Come on. There's a place we can rest up ahead." The place turned out to be a shallow cave tucked into the side of a rocky outcrop, hidden behind a curtain of ivy. Inside, the air was cool and dry, the floor scattered with old furs and the remnants of a fire. Jera knelt, striking flint to tinder with practiced ease. Within moments, a small flame flickered to life, casting dancing shadows against the walls. Vrissa sat across from her, folding her long legs beneath her. "You live here." "Sometimes." Jera didn't look up as she fed the fire. The silence stretched. Vrissa watched the way the firelight played across Jera's face, deepening the hollows of her cheeks, gilding the edges of her scar. She was beautiful in a way that made Vrissa's chest ache. Not despite the scar, but because of it, a life etched into skin. "You're staring again," Jera muttered. Vrissa didn't deny it. "You fascinate me." Jera barked a laugh. "Yeah? Well, you're the first. Then the others are fools." The words hung between them, heavy and unexpected. Jera's hands stilled. When she looked up, there was something raw in her gaze, something unguarded. Vrissa reached out, her fingers hovering just above Jera's scar. "May I?" Jera tensed. For a heartbeat, Vrissa thought she would pull away. Then slowly she nodded. The touch was feather-light, just the barest brush of fingertips against skin. Jera's breath hitched. "Does it hurt?" Vrissa asked. "Not anymore." Vrissa traced the line of it, from brow to cheek. "It's beautiful," Jera scoffed, but there was no heat in it. "Now I know you're lying." "I don't lie." Vrissa's thumb lingered at the corner of Jera's mouth. "It's a story, and stories are precious." Jera's eyes searched hers. Then, slowly, she reached up, catching Vrissa's wrist. But she didn't pull away. Instead, she turned her face into the touch, her lips brushing against Vrissa's palm. The fire crackled. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled. And in that moment, something between them shifted irrevocably, inevitably. Dawn found them curled together in the furs, Jera's back pressed against Vrissa's chest, the alien's arms wrapped around her. Vrissa had never slept beside another before. It was nice. Jera stirred as sunlight crept into the cave. She turned, her nose nearly brushing Vrissa's. For a long moment, they just looked at each other. Then Jera smirked. "You snore." Vrissa's eyes widened. "I do not." "Like a bear." Vrissa huffed, but there was no real annoyance in it. How could there be, when Jera's laughter was still warm between them? Outside, the forest woke around them. And for the first time in a long time, Jera didn't feel the urge to run. The days blurred together in a rhythm of movement and stillness, of stolen moments between the trees. Jera taught Vrissa how to track deer by the bend of broken branches, how to set snares that wouldn't maim, how to distinguish edible roots from poisonous ones by the way their leaves caught the light. In turn, Vrissa showed her the patterns of the stars beyond what human eyes could see. Constellations her people had mapped millennia ago, stories written in celestial fire. One evening, as they sat by a creek with their feet in the cool water, Jera plucked a smooth stone from the bank and turned it over in her fingers. "Why us?" she asked suddenly. "Out of all the worlds, why study humans?" Vrissa watched the way the fading sun painted Jera's skin gold. "Because you burn so brightly," she said simply. Jera snorted. "We burn each other." "Yes, and you love just as fiercely." Vrissa reached out, tucking a loose strand of hair behind Jera's ear. "That contradiction fascinates me." Jera's throat worked. She looked away, but not before Vrissa saw the flush creeping up her neck. The stone skipped across the water's surface once, twice, before sinking. Later, when the fire had burned low and the night insects sang, Jera pressed her lips to the pulse point beneath Vrissa's jaw and whispered, "Study this, then." Her hands were calloused but gentle as they mapped silver skin, learning its textures as Vrissa had once studied human customs, with reverence, with hunger. The alien gasped when Jera's teeth grazed the delicate point of her ear, a sound so purely human in its surprise that Jera laughed against her collarbone. "You're not writing this down, scholar," she murmured. Vrissa tangled her fingers in dark hair. "Some things," she said breathlessly, "are just for me." The seasons turned. They built a shelter deep in the woods where the trees grew thick, weaving branches into walls that sighed with the wind. Jera taught Vrissa how to smoke meat, how to mend clothes with sinew thread. Vrissa, in turn, showed her how to press flowers between pages so their colors never faded. One morning, as frost painted the grass silver, Jera woke to find Vrissa gone from their pallet. She found her outside, standing motionless as the first snowflakes caught in her eyelashes. "You've never seen snow before," Jera realized. Vrissa turned, her smile brighter than the winter sun. "It's like the stars are falling." Something in Jera's chest tightened. She pulled Vrissa close, kissing her until they were both breathless. "Come inside," she muttered against cold lips, "before you freeze your damn fool self." But she lingered a moment longer, watching the wonder on Vrissa's face as the world turned white around them. The hunters came with the thaw. Jera smelled the smoke before she saw it, the acrid tang of torches carried on the wind. She grabbed Vrissa's wrist mid-laugh, her body going rigid. "Run," she said. This time they weren't fast enough. The magistrate stepped from the trees, his crossbow leveled at Jera's heart. "Traitor!" he spat. Behind him, a dozen men fanned out, their weapons glinting. Vrissa stepped forward, her voice calm. "She's done nothing wrong." "Silence, creature." The magistrate's finger tightened on the trigger. "You've corrupted her with your alien ways." Jera bared her teeth. "The only thing corrupt here is you." The bolt loosed. Vrissa moved faster than thought, her body slamming into Jera's as they tumbled to the ground. Pain lanced through Jera's shoulder. A graze, nothing more. But when she looked up, the world slowed. Vrissa's eyes had gone black from edge to edge. Her fingers elongated into claws. The magistrate stumbled back as her form shifted, silver skin hardening into plates of armor, her spine curving as something other unfolded from within. The hunters screamed. Jera had just enough time to think before Vrissa moved. It wasn't like the stories. There was no mindless violence, no slaughter. Just precise, terrifying efficiency. A clawed hand disarming a man here, a kick sending another flying there. Within minutes, the hunters were fleeing, their courage shattered. When it was over, Vrissa stood trembling, her form melting back to normal. She turned to Jera, her eyes wide with fear. Not of the men, but of Jera's reaction. Jera wiped blood from her lip. "Took you long enough to show me that," she said hoarsely. Vrissa made a sound halfway between a laugh and a sob. And then they were running again, hand in hand, leaving the trampled snow behind. The world beyond the forest was vast and unknown, but they walked into it together, two outcasts with nothing but the clothes on their backs and the weight of their choices. Jera's shoulder ached where the bolt had grazed her, but the pain was distant, unimportant compared to the warmth of Vrissa's fingers laced through hers. They traveled at night, sticking to the shadows, avoiding the flickering lanterns of villages. The stars became their compass, Vrissa whispering their names like old friends. Jera had never cared much for the sky before, but now she found herself staring up at it, tracing the constellations with her eyes, imagining the stories Vrissa's people had woven into them. One evening, as they rested in the hollow of an ancient oak, Jera turned to Vrissa. "What now?" she asked quietly. Vrissa's fingers stilled where they had been braiding a strand of Jera's hair. "What do you want?" Jera thought of the village, of the Gallows, of the way the magistrate had looked at her, like she was something broken. Then she looked at Vrissa, at the way the firelight caught in her amber eyes, and knew the answer. "This," she said simply. "You." Vrissa smiled, slow and sweet. "Then that's what we'll have." Years later, in a valley no map had ever recorded, travelers spoke of a strange pair who lived among the wildflowers. A woman with a scar like lightning and eyes sharp as flint, and her silver-skinned companion who knew the names of every star. They said the hunter could fell a deer with a single arrow, that her laughter carried on the wind like birdsong. They said the scholar could cure fevers with herbs no one else could name, that her voice could soothe even the most restless child. But most of all, they spoke of the way the two moved together, always touching, always in sync, as if they shared the same heartbeat. And if sometimes, on the darkest nights, villagers swore they saw something other moving through the trees, something with claws and eyes like liquid night, well, no one spoke of that too loudly. After all, some stories were best left unwritten. In their cottage by the meadow, surrounded by pressed flowers and shelves of handwritten journals, Jera pressed a kiss to Vrissa's temple. "Happy?" she murmured. Vrissa turned her face up, catching Jera's lips with her own. Beyond measure. Outside, the stars burned bright, indifferent to the small, perfect lives unfolding beneath them. And that was enough.